Hello everybody, Jose Rodriguez back again. The other day I showed you the differences between EPSON and Canon printers when it comes to the minimum non-printable margins that the drivers and sometimes even the application imparts on you as you are trying to create a layout for your finished print. So if we go back and look at the other video, the previous one where I demonstrated it on Qimage, you notice that when I loaded anything on the 8550, my printable areas were always the same decimal point. In other words, if it was 0.50, then the other dimension would also be X amount of inches, 0.50, X amount of inches, 0.50. Whereas when we switched over to a Canon printer, that point, whatever two-digit number, was always different, which means that either the leading trailing edge borders would be a different width or the side borders would be a different width. So we're going to look at what happens when you do the same thing in Lightroom, okay? It should be interesting. Now, this is the result we got on the 8550. Notice I have fairly even borders. Again, nothing is perfect because the paper positioning is a mechanical process and it cannot be guaranteed that it will be placing your paper at exactly the same position or that imaginary central axis of the printer. This is on the Pro-10, and notice immediately this margin is actually wider than this one. So even though this one and this one seem to be pretty close visually, about as close as you can get, we're going to go ahead and jump into the Lightroom, and I'm going to show you that there is a difference when you do this same thing in Lightroom. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom, and I loaded one of my grandson's photos. Let's go ahead and remove this one, load this one. I have it set to zoom to fill. That means that it's going to fill every bit of space that the driver and the application allows to be printed upon. And I want you guys to look very carefully over here in this region here. The left margin is 0.11 or 11 hundredths of an inch. The right border is different. Look, I'm trying to reduce it, but I cannot. 13 hundredths of an inch. The top border, 11 hundredths of an inch, and the trailing edge or bottom border is 13 hundredths of an inch. What are we printing on? We are printing on the 8550. Now, when we did it in Qimage, the results were always equal margins all the way around. Isn't that interesting? So how can we beat this? How can we center this photograph without having to create any kind of cells, anything at all? We're just going to adjust the margins. And in this case, our margins are adjustable. So what we will do, since the maximum one is 0.13, we're just going to turn all of these into 0.13. The ones that have the 0.11 listed will now become 0.13. Now, when we print this, now you're going to get an even border. And so we have at least matched, or in some cases, you may want to exceed the actual non-printable area. Say, for instance, if we want to do a 1/4 inch, you would do 0.25, 0.25, and 0.25. Boom. Now we have a print with 1/4 inch borders, at least a layout, let's just say, with 1/4 inch borders, and it should print with as even as the printer media positioning can produce for you. But at least theoretically on our layout, we have a 1/4 inch border on all 4 edges. That is it. See, there is a difference. Let's go ahead and try a Canon printer. So we'll go over to page layout. We'll choose, I don't know, the Pro-10 like we did prior. And again, it'll be 8.5 by 11. We don't need to worry about any properties or whatever. We're just going to go ahead and reduce these margins to the least amount allowable. And look at that. This is crazy. 0.25, the left, 0.25 the right, the top is 11 hundredths, and the bottom 21 hundredths. So if we want even borders in this case, we have to match this one, the 0.25. 0.25, 0.25. And now we have even borders all around. Isn't that strange? I guess it depends also on the printing application that you are using. Okay, not just the driver. So these forced non-printable margins depend also on the application and not just on the driver. So how strange is that? It doesn't get any stranger. So again, if you want to get an even border, you have to zoom to fill. There's no way around that. Your photo, if you do not do that, your photo may not fit evenly in that complete printable area that you created by setting your margins to be the same exact width. And you have to remember, you have to exceed the maximum margin. Whatever that number is, you have to either match it or exceed it a little bit so that all four then are beyond the edges of the maximum non-printable margin, okay? The maximum width. And they're always going to be, in this case, weird. The left and right were different. So again, really, really nuts. I don't understand why that happens and why it should even occur, okay? So I like the combination. In my case, let's go back to the previous video, 8550, okay? It's always going to end up with equal borders regardless. And so 8x10 will always have an equal border. A tiny, relatively small width border, but still is going to be the same. It's going to look like this, nice and even, as opposed to this. You notice wider, narrower. All right, that is it for now. Thank you so much for watching. And of course, as always, happy printing, everybody. Bye-bye.